Donald Trump's transition efforts and how the process could be playing out. The Wall Street Journal reports Trump's transition team has put together digital presentations for the president-elect that feature headshots of potential contenders for key cabinet positions. Now, people familiar with the process tell the paper that aides are reviewing candidates' television interviews to gauge whether they are adept at selling Trump's agenda. The efforts reflect the priorities of the incoming commander-in-chief, who expects that his cabinet secretaries look the part and keep track of what allies and adversaries say about him on cable news. The paper continues. The digital presentations on a screen instead of in briefing books will feature details of candidates' resumes and are intended to give the president-elect an easy way to pore over his options, the people said. Trump, his advisors said, relishes the process of picking his staff and the attention it brings. And for some of the picks taking shape, President-elect Trump announced Tom Homan, the former acting director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, who backed his zero tolerance policy, will be his administration's border czar. In a post on Truth Social, Trump wrote that Homan's areas of control will include the southern and northern borders, all maritime and aviation security. Trump added border czar Homan will be in charge of the deportation of illegal immigrants. Homan touts hardline immigration views and previously vowed to run the biggest deportation force this country has ever seen.
So Zanny, obviously, this is going to be a big part of what Donald Trump likely does at the beginning of his administration. He promised mass deportations, historic deportations. The American people heard it every day for about a year and a half and voted for him. So this is going to be one of the first things, and I would guess one of the great challenges would be politically for this possible director to avoid the sort of chaos we saw at the beginning of his first term, where those first 3-4 days were just pictures of airports and other places just absolutely jammed with people, with protests, with chaos.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. This is clearly a top priority, and President-elect Trump will want to make a big show very early on of people being deported. I think for me the question is not will that happen? It definitely will. The question is whether they're really serious about trying to deport millions of people, because the effort cost involved in deporting millions of people, you have to create a huge infrastructure. Whether or not you have to use the military, it would be months and months of really absolute focus. And one thing I've realized in the last few days, talking to a lot of people about how, this administration will set its priorities, is that will come at a price. If you focus overwhelmingly on the border, it takes bandwidth. And so there will be other things that he won't be doing. So I'm expecting a very big show on this. A lot of stuff at the very beginning. But the real question will be, are they serious about the millions and millions of people?
Right.
Well, you're so right. The bandwidth to do this, the way he said he was going to do this, it's going to take up a lot of the attention for the first 2 or 3 months. And whoever's going to be running that agency is going to have to be dealing with the situation, the huge logistical challenges of it. And, of course, there's going to be a lot of reporting on it.
Yeah.
And if it's chaotic like it was the last time, then it gets the administration off on a bad foot.
Yeah. President-elect Trump also announced the names of 2 former cabinet members who will not be rejoining him at the White House. Trump posted that he would not invite former ambassador to the United Nations Nikki Haley or former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to join his new administration. Both Pompeo and Haley had fallen out of favor with the former president, but had endorsed his presidential run. And I wonder what that portends.
I don't know. Jonathan Lemire, obviously loyalty is going to be at the top of Donald Trump's priorities. You also have both of these people at different times being critical of Donald Trump. And as we've said all along, as you've said and reported, this next administration, he's not going to just hire a lot of people and wonder how it's going to shake out. He's looked at what they said. He's looking at actually how they appear on TV, whether they're going to embarrass him when they're out there. He's again lining this up far differently than he did in 2016.
Yeah, in 2016, he was willing to let the establishment figures make suggestions. That's why he ended up with some grown-ups in the room, like a James Mattis, or Rex Tillerson, and the like. This time around, that's not the case. It's just going to be loyalists, and I'm sure we'll talk more later in the show about his push for recess appointments. That's to fill out the federal government with pure loyalists who are going to do what he wants right away. We should mention, obviously, deportations. I mean, that is going to be the signature move early on. At least that's what's promised. But that's going to, to Zanny's point earlier, I mean, just a massive undertaking that's going to be met with a lot of resistance. Like some state governors, Democratic governors, like Massachusetts Governor Maura Healey, have already said they won't allow like their state's National Guard to be part of this. If millions of Americans or millions of people who've been living in America are going to be taken out of their country, the disruption to the fabric of society, the disruption to the economy, there'll be business leaders speaking out. There could indeed, Joe, to your point, be real chaos. There are some who think that chaos might dissuade Trump from going through with it, at least fully. But Zanny, let's talk a little bit about some of these figures here who are not going to be part of the Trump administration going forward. No real surprise on Nikki Haley. She ran against Trump. She was very critical of Trump. The two never spoke during the campaign. It's not a surprise she's not part of it. But Mike Pompeo, yes, he was briefly critical of Trump at a CPAC appearance, but otherwise was seen as a pretty loyal and sort of productive member of his administration. What does it tell you that Pompeo and someone with Pompeo's worldview isn't going to be part of this next administration?
I think it's a very, very important sign. You know, for most of the campaign, a shorthand way of asking, in the rest of the world, asking what this administration would be like was to say, would it be a J.D. Vance administration or would it be a Mike Pompeo foreign policy? And this public humiliation, in a sense, of Secretary Pompeo. I mean, how often do you issue statements saying you're not going to hire people? Yeah. This was done very, very clearly to make a point. And the point was the internationalist, kind of Reagan-strong foreign policy approach, which Secretary Pompeo epitomized, is not coming. I last saw Secretary Pompeo in Kiev, actually, about a month ago. And he was very, very clear that he said it was important that the good guys are seen to win. And that view that it was important for American interests and American strength that Ukraine be seen to win was very much one side of the debate. And I think that side looks like it's now lost. And if I were in Kiev right now, I would be really worried because it looks as though it's very much the kind of let Putin have more of what he wants, push Ukraine to be demilitarized. It's going to be much harder to persuade Donald Trump to get Ukraine into NATO. So I think this is a bad sign if you're Ukraine.
So, Sandy, let me ask you about the Washington Post article. We have Richard Haas coming up, and we're going to be talking to him in a little bit about this. I'm just curious what your sources have been telling you overnight. The Washington Post ran a story yesterday that Donald Trump spoke with Vladimir Putin over the weekend and very clearly said, don't expand the war. Russia's pushing back on that, maybe because Russia doesn't like how this story was framed. No, I don't think the Washington Post is backing off of their reporting. Do you have any reporting on that? Or if that, in fact, is what he said, how significant would that be?
So I would definitely trust the Washington Post over the Russian state statements. I'm not too concerned about that reporting. I think it's not at all surprising. What I think is interesting is that I do think President Trump is going to want to try and avoid a view that that Ukraine is completely defeated. But what he's got to try and figure out now, he's promised to end the war in a day. That's clearly not going to happen. But he's going to try and orchestrate a deal which, Ukraine will lose the territory the Russians currently have. Everybody knows that. The question is, what kind of security guarantee does Ukraine get to prevent Vladimir Putin later on just marching in further? And that's where I think the announcement of Secretary Pompeo not being part of the administration is bad news. And what I think President-elect Trump is trying to do is to give a sense that he's going to talk tough and he's going to say, don't expand the war. Well, Vladimir Putin's just launched an enormous drone attack on Ukraine. It's going to be going through the winter. He's going to smash up the infrastructure. It's clear that the Russians are on the offensive in the east. They're gaining ground. So I'm not sure I would, if I were Vladimir Putin, I would pay too much attention just on those words. I think right now it looks as though Putin has the upper hand.
It will be interesting, Mika. Obviously, you've got the North Koreans now there that are going to be fighting and trying to push further with the Russians into Ukraine. But the question is, again, we've talked about this a good bit over the past few years. You have Donald Trump, what he says to Vladimir Putin, and then you have the actual policies that have been fairly tough in the first administration because the Senate was pushing really tough restrictions. I think the last thing he would wanting to be seen as a strong man, would be to have be forever remembered as the guy who lost Ukraine to Vladimir Putin. So it's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
See what if there is any settlement, what the settlement looks like.